All right, everybody, welcome to another deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
Setting boundaries with kids. It's always a hot topic, right? Like it's right up there with, sleep training and getting them to eat their vegetables.
Right.
But seriously, it's something we all struggle with. And today we're going to really, roll up our sleeves and dive into some listener-submitted tips on creating boundaries that actually work.
I like it.
So, think of this as our crash course in, child wrangling 2.0,
Okay.
because parenting 101 only gets you so far.
That's right.
So first up, and this is a big one, consistency.
Yeah.
It sounds simple in theory,
Right.
but in practice, anyone who's ever tried to wrangle a, overtired toddler into bed at 7 p.m. knows it's not always that easy.
Because you're not just, sticking to a schedule, though that is important, of course. It's about this foundation of trust.
Right.
This sense of security that we're building with our kids.
Yeah.
And young children especially. They really crave predictability.
Oh, absolutely.
They need it.
Yeah.
And when we as parents are consistent with those boundaries we're setting, it helps them understand the world around them.
It was like we're giving them a roadmap, right? Instead of just, randomly changing speed limits and street signs on them.
Exactly.
So what I'm hearing is that if my kid throws a tantrum and I cave and let them stay up late, I'm not just teaching them that tantrums work.
Right.
I'm messing with their entire sense of order and predictability.
Exactly.
Wow, okay.
That's a really good way to put it. It's like, that feeling of when you're lost and you don't have GPS? That's kind of what it's like for a child when the boundaries are always shifting.
Oh, wow.
But when we have that consistent approach, whether it's about bedtime or screen time or, whatever it might be, it's like we're creating this safe and predictable container for them to thrive in.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And, speaking of explaining things, another thing that came up a lot in the listener submissions was this idea of explaining the why behind the rules.
Yes.
But does that mean, like, every time I tell my kid no snacks before dinner, I have to launch into this whole lecture about nutrition and digestion?
Not a lecture, no, but age-appropriate explanations I think are really key.
Okay.
So for a toddler, it might be as simple as, we eat dinner soon, so our tummy isn't too full. But for a teenager, you can start to have more nuanced conversations.
Yeah.
You can talk about the importance of family meals and connection and, even things like portion control.
Right, so it's not just about, because I said so.
Wow.
It's about giving them the tools to actually understand the reasoning behind it.
Exactly. And when you do that, it helps them internalize those boundaries
That makes sense.
rather than just seeing them as like these arbitrary rules that, mom and dad have come up with.
Right, it's like we're helping them develop their own internal compass.
Exactly.
Okay, so that leads us to, I think, maybe the toughest part of setting boundaries.
Okay.
Enforcing consequences.
Ah, yes.
This is where I'll admit I get a little wishy-washy sometimes.
It's hard. It's
Right.
definitely the hardest part.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing to remember here is that consequences don't have to equal punishments.
Okay.
Think of them more as, the natural outcomes of choices.
Okay.
So, for example, if your child doesn't finish their homework, well, okay, maybe that means there's less free time later. Or if they don't put their clothes in the hamper, well, maybe those clothes don't make it to the laundry basket.
Right. Right.
It's about teaching them that their choices have consequences, both positive and negative.
And the listener submissions really emphasize this point, too, about following through on those consequences.
Yes, because consistency is key here.
Right.
If we're only following through, half the time, they're going to keep pushing those boundaries to see what they can get away with.
You're going to test those limits. Oh, absolutely. Okay, so there's this next tip that came up that I find really interesting, and I'm curious to get your take on it. It's this idea of choices within limits.
Okay.
What's the strategy behind that?
So I love this one because it's about empowering our kids.
Right.
It's not about controlling them.
Yeah.
It's about giving them some autonomy within the structure that we've provided.
Yeah.
So instead of dictating every little thing, we offer them choices within the boundaries we've set.
Oh, I see.
So for example, instead of saying, put on your shoes,
Yeah.
you might say, do you want to wear your blue shoes or your red shoes?
Okay.
Or at bedtime, instead of it's time for bed, you could say, would you like to read a book or draw before bed?
Right. So they feel like they have some say, but it's still within, the structure that we've established.
Exactly. And this is so important because it helps them develop that sense of agency
Right.
and responsibility, which are crucial skills for them as they grow.
It's like we're giving them the tools to make their own decisions.
Yes.
And hopefully in the long run, that makes them, more likely to cooperate.
Absolutely.
Because it's not just us, dictating every single thing.
Exactly. It becomes more of a collaboration.
Right. Okay, last but not least, And this one's a bit of a doozy.
Okay.
The listener submissions really emphasize the importance of us, the parents, modeling respectful boundaries.
Oh, yes. This is huge.
And I have to admit, this is one where I sometimes have to, check myself.
Right.
Because how often do we tell our kids to get off their devices while we're scrolling through our own phone?
All the time, right?
Or we tell them to be quiet while we're, trying to have an adult conversation, but then we interrupt each other all the time.
Exactly. And children are masters of observation.
Oh, they are.
They're always watching. They learn so much more from what we do than what we say.
It's true.
So if we're constantly blurring our own boundaries, they're going to learn that it's okay for them to do the same.
It's like that old saying, right? Do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly.
Which, newsflash, never actually worked.
Never.
So really, it all comes down to walking the talk.
It does.
We have to model the behavior we want to see in our children.
Absolutely.
Wow, this has been so insightful. It feels like we've gone beyond just like a list of tips and really delved into the why behind setting boundaries and why it's so crucial for our kids' development.
And I think the key takeaway here is that it's a process.
It's not about perfection.
Right.
We're all going to make mistakes. There are going to be good days and not so good days.
Oh, absolutely.
But the important thing is that we keep trying. We keep learning.
So true. So as you continue on this journey of parenthood, think about one small step that you can take this week to strengthen a boundary with your child. Maybe it's being more consistent with bedtime. Maybe it's offering more choices within limits. Or maybe it's putting down your phone during family time. Even small changes can make a world of difference.
They really can.
And remember, you got this